think you should read it, but just be prepared to have a lot of weird feelings about it. Hi, my name is Adriana, and today I'm going to do my reading wrap-up for the month of August. Let's get started with stats. I read a total of 10 books in the month of August, 7 of which were eyeball reads, 3 of which were audio. My eyeball reads totaled up to 2,767 pages, giving me an average page length of 461, which is great. That is above my goal of 450, so this is definitely a good month to balance out some of my other months. And my average rating was a 3.8. So before I jump into the book by book reviews, please consider liking and commenting on this video and subscribing to my channel if you like bookish things. I've talked about this a couple times, but August is my birthday month. For my birthday month, I like to read books with very little literary value. So I read a lot of kind of fluffy stuff this month. It was super fun and I really enjoyed it, but I did have some carryover from July, so I will start with those ones because those ones definitely have some literary value and I don't want things to get twisted. So the first one of those I will start with is Ithaca by Claire North. This is a Odyssey retelling from the perspective of Penelope. It is the first in a series, so it really follows, I think, 7 years after the Trojan War ends for like a couple months. So it's really just in the thick of Penelope holding on to her kingdom, not knowing where Odysseus is. It's been a couple years since he has been able to send word home. He has been trapped on the island that I don't know how to pronounce with Calypso. So he's out there. We don't know what's going on. She doesn't know what's going on. So she's just doing her best to hold on to her kingdom. This book was rather interesting in that it is narrated by Hera, the goddess Hera. So the gods play a pretty big part in this novel, but don't actually interact with the people in the book. So there is kind of a separation between human and god, but the gods are a large part of this novel and do help move the plot along. So that was kind of an interesting dynamic. I just didn't love this book. This book is a part of a reading vlog I did, so if you're interested in hearing some more of my in-depth thoughts, you can catch that here somewhere in the cards. I will also link it in the description box down below. The next book I finished was an audiobook arc of The Book Eaters, which is a huge release. Very excited about it. I was very excited to get this arc and listen to it. I really enjoyed this story. It is a fascinating world. It follows a society of book eaters, and there is this young woman who is the focus of the novel. She kind of bucks against the rules of this society, and we follow 2 timelines of her as a child growing up and then later in life when she is on the run with her son. At first, we don't really know. There's a dog out there. Whose dog is that? I don't know. It's on the move. It seems to know where it's going. So we kind of go back and forth between her life growing up and the kind of the current timeline of her on the run. We start slotting in kind of the timeline as we go along. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I did listen to it as an audiobook and got an arc of the audiobook from NetGalley. The audiobook was definitely a bit of an interesting experience for me. The narrator has a very thick accent from Northern Britain, and that was a little bit difficult for me to follow. But I listened to a Q&A with the author and the narrator at the end of the book, and the author did say it was really important to her that she get a narrator from the North because this book takes place in northern UK. So it was really important for her to get that kind of feel of the setting and everything else with the narrator. So, I mean, I can't really dock it points for that, but at the same time, I, as an American person with an American accent used to listening to American accents, had a bit of a difficulty following along. Also, with this being a kind of dual timeline sort of situation, it was a little bit difficult to follow that way as an audiobook. I'd probably recommend this as a physical read over an audiobook, but the story is incredible. A beautiful story of motherhood and perseverance. And I don't think we get enough like motherhood stories in like sci-fi and fantasy. So whenever you come across one, especially one as well written as this, I think it needs to be projected out into the universe. So I would definitely recommend this one. All right, so this is the last carryover from July, but that is Detransition, baby. I also listened to this as an audiobook, but I just borrowed it from the library. It was not an ARC. In this book, a man gets his boss pregnant, and due to this he has to out himself as a detransitioned trans woman, and it's basically the story of Ames, our detransitioned man, and his boss Christina deciding how they want to build a family, what a family could look like in this situation. Ames feels really uncomfortable with the idea of being a capital F father based on his, kind of gender expression history. So they look into an option of kind of being a throuple parents with Ames's ex-girlfriend Reese, who is a trans woman. So it's just a lot of exploration of gender identity, trans identity, what a modern family could look like, family building. It was definitely a very interesting read, and I've watched a couple of reviews of this book from trans people, and it seems like this book was definitely written for people who are trans and not people who are cis. So while I did find it really interesting, it was definitely a challenging read for me, just because it's hard for me to relate to a lot of these struggles. I'm obviously very glad I read it. It's an excellent book. There's a reason it's as popular as it is. If you're gonna read it as a cis person, be prepared to have your views challenged a lot, and a lot of conversations and discussions that might feel a little weird. Reese, the ex-girlfriend, has a lot of thoughts and opinions on femininity that can be a little strange as someone who has lived with femininity, is very femme presenting, and also cis. So I think you should read it, but just be prepared to have a lot of weird feelings about it. Is basically the best way I can boil that down. So moving on to my first brainless read for my birthday month, that was The Spanish Love Deception by Elena de Armas? Or just Elena Armas? Yes. By Elena Armas. This is a TikTok favorite and a BookTube flop. Everybody I know who has read this on BookTube has hated it, but I loved it. Maybe I should go over and just make the switch and be a TikTok girly, but I really enjoyed this book, and I think the main reason I loved it was just the representation of engineering, women in engineering, women in a still very male-dominated field. It's a lot of people I think struggled with, I don't know. I don't want to speak for other people, but I could see why maybe a lot of the misogyny in like the first part of this book would be really difficult to read. But it still happens. Like, as a woman who has worked in engineering and manufacturing her entire career, like there's still a lot of misogyny in the engineering and manufacturing world as a whole. I think this was a very realistic depiction of what someone who is very feminine and bubbly working in a position like this could look like. It's also just a fairly stereotypical romance, so if reading about women in engineering isn't for you, you could definitely get this same type of story in many other novels. But I think if you are a woman in engineering, I think you'll really enjoy this. And I actually passed this book off to one of my coworkers, which is why I don't have my physical copy. So I am definitely interested to hear her thoughts and see if she feels the same way I did. That it's just, I felt the depiction of her workplace to be fairly accurate, except at the end, which I guess spoilers if you don't want to be spoiled for this book, but at the end, the love interest actually moves up into a position of leadership where she is directly reporting to him, and it is very unrealistic that a company would let you date your boss. So, that's definitely a little bit of fantasy, but you gotta do what you gotta do for the happily ever after. But I really enjoyed this one. I love women in STEM. I love women in STEM falling in love, and I will stand by that forever. My next brainless read was Sandstorm by James Rollins. I have a dedicated reading vlog to just this book, so if you are, again, interested in in-depth thoughts, I will link that vlog somewhere and you can see my very in-depth thoughts into this book. But this is the first book in the Sigma Force series written by James Rollins. It follows a group of special operatives who work for DARPA protecting American technology. This one specifically takes place in London and the Middle East following an ancient kind of scavenger hunt almost for this ancient city that holds the secrets to antimatter. So a lot of cool history, a lot of kind of religious studies, a lot of science. I really enjoyed that part, but it was written in 2005 by a white man, so there's a lot of issues with not great representations of people of color and women. So don't really want to recommend this to people because it's definitely not great and you're gonna judge me by me saying I love it and I give it 5 stars. I know it's problematic. You don't have to tell me, but I still love it. The next book I read was Love on the Brain. This was another NetGalley arc. This is the, I don't know, I can't even really call this a companion novel to The Love Hypothesis because Hazel and what's his name? Adam don't even show up, like aren't even tangentially related to this book at all. Like I was kind of like looking out for like little sneak peeks that they might be in here, but they weren't in here at all. So I guess it's like the same world, but don't expect to hear anything about Hazel and Adam in this book. This book does follow, what are their names? I can never remember names. This one follows Bee as she gets a really exciting opportunity to work with NASA on a helmet for a spacesuit. She is a neurologist working for the National Institute of Health in America, and turns out she's going to be co-leading this project with her grad school rival Levi. So it is an enemies to lovers kind of setup, and I think what I'm realizing is I don't really like enemies to lovers unless it also involves fake dating, because otherwise it doesn't really make sense to me as to why these two people would ever like come together. And I just feel like in this one it didn't really give me enough of a reason for them to start getting from that, you know, enemies to friends to lovers situation. I just feel like fake dating, I just prefer it. If we're gonna do enemies to lovers, I would also like that attached with fake dating. So this one wasn't my favorite, but it's a quick read. It's pretty snappy and fun. They had some fairly decent banter, but meh is kind of how I feel about that one. But again, women in STEM, so I'm gonna read it. The next one I read was a pretty far departure from my normal romance books, but that was Neon Gods by Katie Robert. This is a Persephone and Hades retelling, which normally wouldn't interest me that much, but it's the start of kind of a companion series. I am a lot more interested in the kind of next books down the line, so I did want to read this one so I could read the later ones, but this is a dark romance retelling. Persephone is the daughter of Demeter, obviously, but in this book, the kind of Greek gods and Olympus is set up very differently than in a lot of like Greek mythology retellings. It takes place in a more modern setting, and the gods aren't really like gods. They're just like powerful people, but they don't have like magic powers or anything. They're just like the ruling class of the city of Olympus, and it is kind of a role that you take on. You know, when one Zeus dies, another person, Zeus's son Perseus, will fill in that role and become the next Zeus. So the gods are more of a role than they are like an actual being. But anyways, moving on. The inciting incident of this book is Persephone is arranged to be married to the current Zeus, who is known for killing his wives. So she obviously takes that very badly and runs off down to the lower city across the river Styx which is Hades' territory, and makes a deal with Hades that if she can live with him for 3 months and pretend to be romantically linked with him, it'll be mutually beneficial for both of them. Hades will be able to kind of like take a jab at Zeus. Persephone will be protected from Zeus, and when she turns 25, she will be able to leave the city because a trust fund she has will kick in and she'll be able to leave. Anyways, not that important because the entire plot and reason for this book is sex. It is just straight erotica sex. The characters all revolve around sex. The plot revolves around sex. Every major thing that happens is related to sex. I'm not gonna lie to you and say that this has any literary merit because that wasn't the point of this month. This book is just sex. And, you know, it's pretty fun. I will be continuing on with the series eventually, but I'm not in any particular hurry to finish out the rest of the series. This next one was an audiobook I listened to with my boyfriend, and that was Tom Segura's collection of essays, I'd Like to Play Alone, Please. And it is so funny. So I've been looking for another audiobook for my boyfriend and I to listen to since we had finished American Prometheus, and decided to take a total 180 from American Prometheus to this collection of kind of memoir-ish essays from Tom Segura, and it's so funny. Tom Segura is a stand-up comedian who is incredible. He is one of my favorite comedians. My boyfriend and I have seen him live, and he's just so freaking funny. He's so funny. And we were laughing hysterically while listening to this. So I would definitely recommend this if you're a fan of Tom Segura. He can be, you know, a little crass, like a lot of stand-up comedians. So if you're not into that type of humor, I would definitely suggest maybe checking out some clips of him on YouTube first and like see if you vibe. But if you do vibe, definitely check out this book. The next book I read was Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. So good. So good. This has gotta blow up on like TikTok or BookTube at some point because it is just the cutest romance I've ever read. I loved it so much. It follows a big time doctor from Minneapolis. On her way back from a funeral, she swerves around a raccoon and gets her car stuck in a ditch, and a strapping young man pulls her out of the ditch, and she ends up having to go into the town to get some food and ends up going home with this strapping young man. And just the romance that follows is so sweet and so sincere without being like saccharine. And I mean, as you could probably tell from the title, they come from two very different worlds. She comes from this long legacy of doctors. She's very much a one percenter, has never had to do any sort of physical labor, doesn't even know how to clean her own house. And this young man is, I say young man, he's my age, he's 28. He is the mayor of this small town in Minnesota and is a carpenter and has had to, you know, scrap and borrow and do whatever to kind of get through life. But they're just so sweet and so cute, and I loved this book so much, guys. It's the best. It's so good. I am definitely going to be checking out some of her other backlist books, but my mom recommended this one to me, so big ups to Mom because this was a very good recommendation. And I would say of all the books I've read this month, this is definitely the top of one I am definitely recommending and think everyone should read. The last book I finished in August was Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. This is a sci-fi horror book that was the pick for this month of the Shelf This Book Club. I didn't really enjoy it. This just isn't really like my thing. Like horror, just not my fave. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's well written. It follows this deep space crew who come across this old ship, I guess kind of luxury, basically a luxury cruise liner, but for space, that disappeared under mysterious circumstances. They decide they are going to try to salvage what is on the ship to make a lot of money. When they get on the ship, some very spooky things happen. The team lead ends up leaving on an escape pod back to Earth and is suspected to have killed the rest of her crew while they were on this luxury ship. She doesn't have a great memory of what happened, and so she's kind of in this holding situation in a mental institution, and they decide they're going to take her back to the luxury cruise liner because they still want to get the remains of the rich people on this ship and kind of figure out what happened. Kind of dual timeline in that we have her in her current timeline where she is at the mental institution and telling the story of what happened, that what she remembers of being on the ship with her crew, and then about halfway through the book, she and a crew from Earth go back to the ship. So it is spooky, it is well written, but it's just not really for me. Not my vibe. So those are all 10 books I read in August. I had a very high quantity reading month, but not everything I read was exactly to my taste, but I kind of needed that. I needed to just get in and read a bunch of, no book is trashy, but I just needed something. I needed a brain break from reading heavy books. And then in September, I'm going to get into some heavy books, and I'm also really excited for that. You need both. You need to balance your life. So let me know if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them. If you have any questions for me about anything I read, I would love to discuss with you down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next video.